This is In Character. I'm your host, Gerard Robinson, Vice President for Education at the Advanced Studies in Culture Foundation. As you know, I get an opportunity to bring together a great group of educators from across the country, and we talk about different themes. Tonight, we're focused on students. Actually, we're focused on students with special needs. And we've got a good group tonight, 7 people. And what we're going to do is just go ahead and jump right into it. What I do for every group is just ask everyone to introduce him or herself. Tell us your first and last name, what you do, and the state you're in. And so we'll start with you, Marianne, because you're closest to me on the screen, at least the way I have it right now.
Hi, everybody. I'm Marianne Woods Murphy. I am from New Jersey, from Teaneck, New Jersey, and I'm a consultant now, but have been a gifted and talented specialist and a Spanish teacher in my career. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Tammy?
Unmute. I've heard the quote of the year is, "You're on mute." So, my name's Tammy Tiong, otherwise known as Miss Tammy. I live in New Mexico. I'm in Dulce. It's on the Hickory Apache Reservation, and I've been here for 19 years as a special education teacher. I spent the first 11 at the elementary level, the next 7 at high school, and then this last year at the middle school level.
Thank you. Let's go with Danielle.
Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle Kovach. I'm a 3rd grade special education teacher in New Jersey. I'm an adjunct professor and also the president-elect for the Council for Exceptional Children.
All right, let's go to Revati.
Hey, everyone. I am Revati Balakrishnan. I am from Austin, Texas, and I teach 5th grade in the Round Rock Independent School District. I was a gifted, talented teacher, a specialist for close to 11 years before I decided to move into the regular classroom.
Thank you. Brett.
Hello there. My name is Brett Bigham. I'm from Portland, Oregon, and I teach K through 5 at a special school for kids who have some pretty challenging behaviors. It's a pretty interesting job, and I'm actually on a 1 more week leave of absence till my COVID shots are good before I can go back into the classroom.
Thank you. Juliana.
Hello, everybody. So nice to be here. My name is Juliana Ortubey. I am in Las Vegas, Nevada. I am a special education teacher. I taught resource for the last 10 years. And then this year I'm doing a co-teaching with pre-K inclusion all the way to 5th grade in the resource and the inclusion general ed setting. And I'm also an instructional strategist working on MTSS supports, behavioral, academic, social, emotional behavior, you name it, that we do it all. And it's great to be here with you all.
Thank you. And Mercedes.
Thanks for allowing me to join you this evening. My name is Mercedes Munoz. I'm out of Portland, Oregon. I work at Franklin High School. I have served as a learning center teacher, working with students in the intensive skills classroom, which is a special focused classroom. And for the last 3 years, I've done push-in instruction and coaching with teachers.
Great. And when we come back to you, tell us what push-in looks like, and for some of our listeners and viewing audience who may not know what that means. So first question is really a general question. What attracted you to the field of education in the first place? A number of you could have taken your credentials and worked in other public sector jobs, or you could have worked in the private sector. And some of you have worked in different sectors, but what attracted you to education? What I'll do is just wait for the first hand to go up, and then we'll go from there. It's like the price is right. All right, let's go, Revati, start with you.
Price is always right, except in teaching. So why did I become an educator? Well, actually, this is my second career. I was a systems analyst, working for about, 12, 15 years before I just decided that I needed to do something good for the world. And my daughters, of course, were in school, and I watched what was going on in school and felt that becoming a teacher might be a good use of my time. And I don't think I've ever regretted that move. I also knew when I moved to be a teacher that I would drop in the pay scale of almost 50%, which also did not matter so much. But what really appalled me was the respect that teachers are given, that it seems to be a job that is thankless in the minds of the public. And therefore, I find a mission in that to prove to the community or prove to anybody, any skeptic, that teaching is a fantastic profession. And I'm not in this only for the money, but also like I can actually make a difference.
As a career switcher, did you have to go through an alternative certification program, or how did you go about getting the credentials?
Yes, definitely. I didn't go through an alternate certification program. I went through Texas State University, and it was a 9-month program that took mid-career change professionals and gave them the classroom experience and whatever was needed, because I think you need a university certification sort of, right, to get your certification. So that's what I did. But the program that I chose, it was very hands-on. And therefore I was so ready for the classroom. And I think, having worked in the corporate world and then coming into teaching, it gave me a very different perspective than I think those who start at 21 in the schools, right? Immediately out of school. So I have a master's in economics, so I'm able to bring in a whole bunch of data analysis and anything. And I think that really suited me for the gifted program too, because those students need those. They thrive on those kind of information, and I was able to give them what they really needed.
Thank you. Tammy, so let's kick the same question over to you.
Great, I didn't raise my hand.
That's okay.
Yeah, I'd be happy to go next. When I was a little girl, I didn't even probably know what the word teacher was, but I wanted to be one. My older sister went to kindergarten and first grade, and I was still at home as like a 3-year-old. And I just remember I would get her backpack because she would have these like colorful things with scissors and books and things that we didn't have at home. And I just wanted to, I would steal them out of her backpack and try to do the worksheets, trace the letters and read the things. And then I would set up my stuffed animals and I would teach them the worksheets, and grade them with the crayon. So I think that was always in me. I also always just loved kids. I always felt actually more comfortable around younger kids. Even when I was a kid, I was always babysitting my younger cousins and my mom's friends' kids. And I would read to them. And in the process of reading, I always was infusing the teaching of it. It just was within me. And even as I was a student throughout school, I feel like sometimes I learned because the teachers taught it well. And then other times I learned despite how teachers were teaching things. And I had a lot of peers who I could tell, they didn't get it or they were failing, and they would just always ask me for help. And so for some reason, I always had ways to be like, well, I know the teacher said like this, but I can see how that was confusing, and I have this way, and it would help them, my peers. And so I also came to special education teaching through an alternative pathway. I started out in outdoor education, and so with actually a degree in English and a minor in environmental studies. I started out through environmental education, and then and I did that for 3 years, and I loved it. It was a dream job. I couldn't believe they paid me to hike around with kids and in the woods and play in the river and grow gardens and teach them about farming and gardening. It was ideal. But ultimately, as the field trip, we were kind of like a one-shot deal. The kids were always engaged. They loved it. We went in the classrooms. We were like the superhero for the day, but they'd come out for their field trip and they'd have an amazing time. They may talk about it the rest of their life, but it was a one-shot deal. And I think ultimately I wanted to have longer lasting, more prolonged relationships with students where I felt like I could make more of an impact. And that's how I ended up in a classroom teaching and teaching special education.
So I know that you're in New Mexico now, correct?
Yes.
Were you also in New Mexico when you were doing the out?
Nope. I was in California when I was doing that.
Yeah, I heard forest and I was like, well, now maybe I could be wrong with my geography, but yep, no, I'm from California. So
okay.
no,
but no, there's plenty of forest out here in New Mexico too.
There is.
Forest, and in fact, it snowed yesterday, and then today I was in shorts walking the dogs. So yeah, you never know. I'm in the mountains.
Thank you. All right. Who else wants to go? Let's jump in. Yeah, go ahead, Mary Ann. And just feel free to jump in. The hand is for you for the first go around.
So just after I graduated from college with a degree in philosophy, I went to live in Salamanca, Spain, right? Mm-hmm. And with my husband, and we were so excited about living abroad, and I was learning Spanish. He knew it already, but the culture, the foods, the striking scents on the streets were all fascinating to me. But soon I realized I had to learn new rules of life to be successful in a new culture. And I quickly got an opportunity to become an English teacher in a local language academy. And since I didn't speak Spanish, I was using lots of wild gestures and exaggerations to help my students learn. So I fell in love with teaching then, right? Because when I teach, I feel most alive. I use every single skill that I've ever had and keep acquiring to help other people break through barriers to their own goals and get their own superpowers. I have taught all grade levels. I have taught in 2 languages, first as a language teacher and then as a gifted and talented specialist. It's that feeling I have when I'm in the middle of the mix, right? And I'm called upon to use every single thing I know, every single thing I am, and try to reach across that divide between one human being and another to be able to make a bridge to learning. So that's how my teaching began.
Right. You may be the 3rd person that we've interviewed for this with a degree in philosophy. I have one as well. And much to my parents, they were like, what the heck are you going to do with a degree in philosophy?
You have one too?
Oh, yeah. We'll talk about that offline. My parents wanted to go to therapy after I made that mention from switching from business.
Awesome.
All right. Let's go ahead and Brett.
Well, I'll jump right in there because Mike, my husband, just graduates with his master's in philosophy this week. So you guys. I'm funny because I too am a second career teacher, and I took a job in California substituting and did such a good job with the behavior classrooms that a couple months into it, they called me and said, you're a new full-time grade 3 and 4 behavior academic room teacher. And so with no training whatsoever, I took over a special ed room and I absolutely loved it. I had grown up with a pretty difficult older brother who I had to manage his behavior, and even though he was 6 years older than me. So when I stepped into this class, it was a return to some skills I had since I was little. So I didn't have those behavior issues that most teachers would have faced in the same room. And then on the flip side, my first proper classroom was at a very posh private school in Austria, where I was teaching some of the richest kids of Europe. And I learned very quickly that I had been in a poverty-stricken classroom with special needs kids and some of the richest kids. And those rich kids were just as needy, just in different ways than the kids, that I had met in Palm Springs. And it was an important lesson that bank statements don't mean kids have what they need, definitely. So oftentimes the special ed teacher, the talented and gifted students also fall into our classrooms. So it's interesting that it is that blend of knowledge that a teacher needs to have for the 2, very different learning groups.
Thank you.
Sure, I'll go next. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
You're so sweet. It's always like, there's always that Zoom dance that we do. So thank you, Mercedes. I appreciate that. I became a teacher for language preservation, identity, and culture preservation. For me as a child growing up, my parents were very adamant that my sisters and I remain tied to our identities, our language, our culture, and had a positive outlook on those gifts that we had. Going through school, I realized not everybody had access to this kind of support, and for various reasons, right? So I became a bilingual general education teacher. I went to school in Tucson, Arizona, right at the time that English only laws were starting to happen. And it was a really tough time being a college student with a bilingual degree, because I had to get dual certification in order to do that. And then my first year teaching, I was a 5th grade bilingual teacher, and you had all this political strife happening. And I had a student who was so talented. He ran this black market store out of his backpack, and he was able to do amazing calculations with profits and costs, and what were the items and what he was phasing out. So every time he would get caught, that's what I focused on. I was like, look at the strengths that this child has. Nonetheless, he had significant difficulty learning to read and write. He could write his name and a few other words. And I asked myself, how does a child with so much potential, so much promise get to 5th grade without knowing how to read and write? And so that, coupled with the fact that there was kind of a workaround within the special education settings where we could use bilingual skills to teach without, a whole lot of workaround, it was an easy decision for me. I got to enroll in a bilingual special education program, which I know is a rare opportunity. So I took advantage and I became a special education teacher. And for me, it's been all about working with families to figure out a way where school can be a bridge to students affirming their identities in a very positive way that allows them to see their learning needs as a difference versus a disability, even though some students, do struggle with disabilities, and we have to support them in the best way that we know how, but really advocating with our students to teaching them that it's about them learning in the way that makes the most sense to them, and speaking up when they need to speak up, and doing so maintaining who they are. So all of those are reasons that I became a teacher, and then I have stayed a teacher. And then this year, my new role as a co-teacher has really allowed me to share my framework, my perspective, my inspirations with other teachers. And I've learned a lot by doing so.
Thank you. We'll go to Mercedes, and then we'll end with Danielle.
A lot of what Juliana shared is really resonant with me. I approached teaching because I saw it as a revolutionary act that could change the lives of students who oftentimes looked like me, came from the same neighborhoods, and shared some of the same background. I entered special education as a profession because of my relationship with my daughter, and seeing how school, more often than not, was more designed to make her conform in ways I felt like as a parent I was continually advocating for people to see that she was both brilliant and had some behavioral needs and needs for supports in the classroom. And I didn't like that it was a binary where it was either or. It was like, she can read and she's writing plays and she wants to produce them, and she struggles with a learning disability in math. And so that really was my pathway, just sitting at the table with educators who didn't see me as someone with assets as well, and that I was best informed about my own child. And so I really took that as a challenge and both a mantra, that when I sat down with families and when I sat down with students, I didn't ever want them to experience what I had experienced during my middle daughter's primary years. And I think that I have lived up to that, just being a fierce advocate and being tenacious about finding one more way for a child to demonstrate what they know, and getting people to adapt what they're doing rather than asking the child to do so.
Thank you. And also thank you for opening up your personal story to the listening and viewing audience. Danielle.
I think my story started a little bit like Tammy's, and I would even put on my mom's high heel shoes and pretend I was one of my teachers teaching to all of my dolls. But I've always loved school, loved being in school. So being a teacher was just, something that I've always wanted to do. And it wasn't until I was in high school and worked at a camp for students with exceptionalities that I thought, oh, okay, special education, that's where I want to go. But over my years in education, my why has changed over the years. It's evolved, it's grown, and I didn't know quite what my purpose was or my role was truly in education until I had my own children. I have 2 boys with exceptionalities, and that really puts a different perspective on your teaching and how you work with your students, how you work with your families. And, when I first started teaching, I was in my classroom. It was my safety zone. It was my comfort area. I was with my students. And the more I grew and learned, I realized, you know what? It's time to step out of that box. I have to do more for my students, more for their families, more for my children. So my mission and my passion now is based on advocacy for students with exceptionalities. Every time I go on Capitol Hill and lobby for our governmental policies that our students need, that's for my students, it's for my children, it's for their families. And that purpose has grown and evolved. And just being able to see the successes we have with working with teachers with professional development, working with my college students to help them become strong educators. It all comes around full circle. So I'm sure my purpose and my passion will continually change and grow, but just being an educator is one of the most valuable things and one of the important things that we have in our nation, and I'm honored to be one.
Thank you. In the opening, we heard different terms. Exceptionalities is one, special needs is another, special education is another, gifted. When we hear these terms, we often think they are synonymous, and we actually know that they're not. In some instances, there can be some crossover. So we have those here who have worked with gifted and non-gifted students. What attracted you to this particular learning population? And was there any traditional, I would say, additional education or training that you needed? Were there friends of yours who said, hey, I will help you along the way. This is why you should come to work for our group? And I'll stop there and just see who wants to go ahead and weigh in.
I'll go first. No, I did not have anybody who was a teacher who was close to me, because in general, the Asian Indian American population do not tend to go towards teaching. They are more the doctors, lawyers, engineers kind of people. And so I think it was actually surprising for a lot of people that I did not go that route. I mean, I was a programmer, right? I fit the bill of an Indian American woman, right? And then suddenly to drop it all and go into education itself was a shock. And then I just got placed in a GT classroom because they couldn't find anyone for that classroom. So my first job, normally I am told that first year teachers do not get placed in GT classrooms. So my principal must have seen something in me, or must have said, this is the classroom where she can do the least damage, So either way, I wasn't there. And I also happened to work in a school district that has a large Asian American population. So my school, for example, is about 54% Indian American. Okay. And And I am one of like 1% of teachers who are Indian American in the whole country.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel that God placed me well, because these kids needed me. And at the same time, just like you want your teacher population to reflect your student population, that's not going to happen in a short time, because no Indian Americans are getting into the profession. Mm-hmm. So, but then also, either it is because of effort or whatever, or the emphasis on education in Asian American families, most of the gifted population also tend to be, Asian American families. So you do inherit a classroom that looks like you, right? Mm-hmm. So I just felt it was just the best fit for me. So nobody encouraged me to go into teaching. Nobody told me GT classroom is good. It just happened. And I think it happened for the good of all of us, both the teacher and the students. And that's how I have continued. But I also realized that I'm a person who likes change constantly. And that does not happen in the regular classroom. In terms of, you must have consistency for your students to learn, right? But with gifted students, what you find is that they get bored with consistency, because their brains are going in different directions, and they're too fast for the teacher, because I remember my first lesson plan as a GT teacher, everybody had taught me, like, you need to have your, warm up, and then a 20-minute mini lesson, and then a 40-minute something, practice for your whatever 50 minutes. And guess what? In 5 minutes, the kid had mastered the concept. The kids had mastered the concept. And this is day one of my teaching career. And I'm like, what am I doing wrong here? But fortunately, because I'd been a systems analyst and I know higher mathematics, I was able to mold the whole lesson into just generalizations and pushing them ahead. Let me just get through this period. And now I got to regroup within day 2, because mm-hmm. The lesson plan that works for a regular classroom is not going to work for a GT classroom. And I think, in general, I think my ability to change, my like for change, mm-hmm. might have facilitated that easier than most teachers.
Interesting. Marianne, I see you want to go ahead and weigh in.
Yes, I came to work with this population because at first I worked for 10 years and I started out as a founding teacher at a magnet school for students identified as sort of talented kids interested in math, science, technology. And I came in clueless, right? I came in as a Spanish teacher who really had no special experience or training to work with this population. And we went through a lot as a faculty. The faculty for this school were drawn from university educators, people who were very experienced in their areas. And together we were with these students. And at first, when we were preparing to make a brand new school for these students, we thought that we should just be super advanced all the time, right? And then the students arrived, and the students were complex, right? They were just kids. They wanted to do puppet shows. They wanted to do everything. And what I learned from that experience and over those years is that what we see as highly intelligent or highly gifted is actually super complex, and students need lots of support, and they need lots of opportunities to take on projects that have real world applications that mean something. They need to develop meaning. They need to be respected, like any human being needs to be respected. So when I became an actual gifted and talented specialist, now at the elementary school level, I realized that what we were doing needed to be seeing talent development as a lever for rising, like a rising sea lifts all boats, or everyone has certain areas of talent and genius that we need to cultivate, right? Like Guldi Mohammed talks about, we need to cultivate that genius. And when you look at a talent development lens, instead of just here's this population over here, and I don't think it's an accident that often students are identified as gifted because they come from one group or another, and so many students of color, for example, are not identified as gifted, and it's simply not true that they're not. So how can we, the experience brought me to a place of, you know, how can we use the learning of gifted and talented education to use it as a lens for helping find the genius in our students?
Thank you.
I'm so glad you said that, Marianne, because I was sitting here thinking, are all students gifted? And to quote Dr. Chris Emden, often the spaces are too rudimentary for our students for them to show up and to have the opportunities, right, for our teacher apertures to be widened enough to see their unique talents and abilities. And so in my role in the classroom, I see, and with coaching with teachers, right, I'm always looking for the space, like for that light to shine through. And when we break up some of our routines and get different tools or have different frameworks, like Guldi Mohammed's, for example, Cultivating Genius, right? When she talks about criticality and joy, these are all lenses that we can apply to our lessons and create spaces for all children to show up as their best selves. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation.
Thank you. Danielle?
Well, my conversation just turned, just to add on that too, you know, I hear all the time from my students, well, I'm not smart. I can't do this. Mm-hmm. What's smart? What does that mean? What does that look like? You know, we often equate to intelligence as your IQ, and that's not it at all. Everyone has their own differences, their challenges, their gifts, their strengths. And, you know, as a special education teacher, that's what we do. We play up their strengths and we work on their weaknesses, because we all have them. We all have them. And it doesn't make one person smarter than the other. And in terms of, you know, becoming a special educator, it was my mom that led me to being a special educator. You know, as I said, I've always wanted to be a teacher. And the camp that I started at when I volunteered when I was in high school, it was my mom that led me to that said, you know what, give this a try. I bet you'll like it. And she was the one that saw those strengths in me. And, you know, when I first started teaching, I didn't have a mentor. At that time, special educators didn't need one. I don't know why we didn't need one, but we didn't get one. So I continually love to learn and grow and go to classes, go to trainings. And it's interesting now that my oldest son, who's 20 and in college, when he was in high school trying to find, you know, what he wanted to do, my husband and I saw in him that he had those qualities of a teacher, but we didn't want to present it to him because he's the kid that would say, okay, mom and dad want me to be a teacher, so I'm going to do it. I'll never forget the day he came to us and he said, I think I want to be a teacher. And, you know, we knew that that was the fit for him. And then he came back and said, Mom, I think I want to be a special educator. So now he's finishing up his sophomore year in special education. And what's funny is so many people come to me and you are encouraging this. You want your child to be a teacher. And I can't imagine why I wouldn't. And if anyone knows what it's like to be an educator, it's a child of a parent who's a teacher. And, you know, I think that we just need to encourage more students who have those qualities to want to be teachers. So that's how I got started. And it turned around full to my son as well.
Thank you.
Can I add a little bit to that too?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's so important to also recognize that students can have multiple exceptionalities. I've worked with several students who are twice exceptional, meaning that they have one of the eligibilities to receive special education services, and also they are gifted and talented. And I think that the conversation about representation is so important. We do have kids who are linguistically diverse, also students of color who are overrepresented in special education and underrepresented in gifted and talented services. If you were to ask me, and if I had a magic wand, I would say any child who speaks a language other than English, even if that's the only language they speak, is a gifted child. And that I would love to see schools uplift all of the different areas that students can be gifted. And I think linguistically gifted is one of the areas that is the less explored areas in education. I'll give you a quick example. I worked with a student who, using our language identification system, was considered a 1 or emergent, the lowest on the scale. After working with the student for some time, I learned that she spoke 4 languages. And
so for
all
the
she needed.
Audience, there's a pause in the middle. You've got a freeze.
Uh-oh. I do see your video's frozen. Is my audio okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can see everybody and everybody's moving.
Okay, Catherine, you let me know when I should keep
You're
going.
fine.
Or Gerardo.
You're fine.
Okay.
On the recording.
So I worked with students who have 2 exceptionalities. They have one of the categories to receive special education services, and also they are gifted and talented. And it's really important for us to take a deep dive into why students of color and linguistically diverse students are overrepresented in special education and severely underrepresented in gifted and talented schools. Even at schools where the majority of the student population are kids of color, when you look at the numbers of kids who are served in gifted and talented, and you compare that number to other schools, the numbers don't add up. And so I do think we need to look really critically at the biases behind identifying students with gifted and talented abilities. I'll give you a quick example. I worked with a student who spoke 4 languages, but we didn't know that right off the bat. So she was categorized as an emergent language learner. And it turns out she speaks American Sign Language, English, Tagalog, and Spanish. And it just took us really getting to know her, understanding her strengths, and giving her the time that she needed to process language in 4 languages before she made a production of work or spoke. And I still am really close to her and her family, and I speak to them often. And it was just exceptional what happened once as a school we recognized this strength and we played up on her strengths. The transformation. So I do think a lot has to do with how we wrap around a child in terms of seeing what they're capable of doing.
I would like to step in here. Just because of what Juliana said, that it is hard to find special needs kids in gifted programs. I think the reverse actually, the thing is, I've tried to place many gifted students in special needs programs because they need it. Okay, and if you're twice exceptional, what happens is you find a way to overcome your disability in the early years when things are easy, right? And so you are not identified because you are kind of just under the radar. But by the time they come to 5th grade, we see a lot of like either dyslexia or any learning disability and all of that. And when I have tried to place them in, so like this child really needs help because until now he's been fine because he had coping mechanisms, but this is not going to extend in middle and high school. That's where he's going to hit a wall. So can we find the services for him with an interventionist or a special needs teacher? And basically most schools don't do that because the child is producing as far as they are concerned. And what does producing look like? Your standardized testing. Right? So yes, I understand that, but the reverse is also very difficult, Juliana, and oh my God, I've like broken lots of relationships because I've literally fought with administrators, but still I don't get anything. They're like, yeah, we'll look at it, but we are still looking at it. So it's hard either way.
Good point on both sides. Yeah, Tammy, you want to go ahead and weigh in?
So when I when I first entered the field of special education and was learning all the acronyms, after a while I was like, my students are all GID. They're geniuses in disguise. I mean, it was amazing to me, all the gifts and talents, no matter what we call them, that were at the core of all these students that I was working with that had these exceptionalities, mostly, as disabilities, like developmental disabilities, when I was working with the young students. But I've worked with students of all exceptionalities, and every student I've worked with, it's like there's this core of incredible, amazing, fascinating human beings that with this layer of a lens that maybe teachers can't see through, and see that, Marianne, you mentioned earlier about the superpower in the students. And when you said that word, it reminded me of the way I saw my 5th grade teacher, who, by the way, I was in gifted and talented programs, but not in classes. It was just, we had, when I was in grade school, we had, morning programs and some afternoon things, and we did extra activities. But my 5th grade teacher, Mrs. Thorne, I used to think she was a superpower, that was these maybe magic glasses that she could see through every kid's labels, their reputation, what they look like, and see through to who that kid wanted people to see in them, including myself. And that's why I always will give a shout out to Mrs. Thorne everywhere I go, because I know I'm getting a little off track, but she was able to see and celebrate and enhance and build upon and nurture what every kid wanted somebody to see in them. And that was amazing. So going back to how I came into education through outdoor ed, like I said, we were the field trip. We would swoop through the classrooms, do this fun presentation. They'd swoop to our 1,600-acre wilderness preserve and do this fun outdoor activities. And so the classroom teachers would give us guides, index cards, because we would split the whole, maybe 2 whole classes up into small groups. And they had to give us index cards with their names. And of course, we need to look at any medical issues that might, allergies and things like that. But I remember that sometimes the teachers would say, they would put little asterisks next to the behavior kids' names, like, watch out for that kid, he's going to be trouble. Mm-hmm. Well, I was young when I was doing that special education job. And of course, you look at the medical and important things, but with the behavior ones, I was like, okay, thanks. And I would put the note in my pocket or my backpack and go about the day. And I don't know how many times it would come to the end of the day and I'd look at the note or the index card and be like, wow, those asterisk behavior kids were the most amazing, brilliant, engaged students. And so I always took that into when I went into special education, because I'm like, well, yeah, we can't just, take the IEP and stick it in your pocket and ignore it and look at the kids for who they are. We have to go through them. But realistically, I sometimes wonder, I have often worked with teachers who, it's like, if they didn't hear right away or see that kid had an IEP, they may have treated them differently. They may have, been able to better see their gifts and their true abilities. But yeah, sometimes the label, it puts preconceived notions and then they put them in a box. And so I've always seen, the whole range of students with so-called learning disabilities that are gifted, and the students with autism are, gifted. And again, there's always this fine line between, genius and crazy. And it's like, when you think outside the box like that, like so many, all my students have, They're so fascinating that they cannot necessarily fit into society's box or the box that education wants them to look like and perform on the standardized test. So
thank you. Oh, good job. Brett, let's go to you.
Well, you know, because I worked as a substitute before I became a teacher, and I had no idea of what the job was going into it, I was just this kind of goofy guy who suddenly had a classroom. And I was so lucky to enter that way into the profession. I was in Palm Springs. It was a lot of older teachers there. A lot of retired people had moved to Palm Springs and then taken, you know, a teaching job. So I ended up getting called into the same classes over and over again. And what I ended up doing was learning from the assistants in the classrooms. That's who I learned the job of teaching from, was this variety of assistants who were holding classrooms together. In my first 3 years of teaching, I worked as a long-term sub. I would be in one room for a couple months and get it kind of stable. And then they'd move me onto another room, and they would be hiring the new teacher as I was getting things going, and I'd move on. And I met this incredible group of paraeducators, and they all taught from such a different way. As a sub coming in for a day, but then being extended to a week and then 2. Very often I never saw the IEPs or the labels or the paperwork. I saw the schedule and the work they were hoping to be working on. And here I had a paraprofessional who was a cheerleader, usually someone who just loved those kids because they do not do that job for the money. And they taught me how to be a teacher. So when I did finally get my own classroom, I came at it in such a different way. It was all about what works in that moment, in that small group, not the labels, not the files. And I didn't realize for so long that most people read all those files before they ever meet the kid. And then they have an idea of who's coming in the door. And I got to teach for 4 years, not knowing who was coming in the door, and just accept them for who they were.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my path into the profession, and I'm very thankful for it. And you know, I've been very, very blessed. I was Oregon Teacher of the Year, the first special education teacher who won that award. And Mercedes is the next special education teacher. It's very funny. We teach only about 4 blocks away from each other, but but the year I won, I had the 3 longest serving employees in my school district. They were 3 paraprofessionals who had almost 100 years of experience between the 3 of them. And I had 2 more besides that. So my para team had over 100 years. And here I was, a relatively new teacher with just a couple. And I had the sense, because I'd learned my job from paraprofessionals, to mine my staff for every good idea and their experience. And I think that it made me like a 10-year teacher my first couple of years, because I had collected all of the knowledge from the paras I had worked with as the 4 years as a substitute. I think I'm a different teacher because of it.
And that's so interesting in terms of you having someone to wrap their arms around you, and then Danielle, very different experience of coming into the profession. And then I hear from Juliana and Rivati, on one end, gifted to special needs or special education to gifted challenges there. You bring up Mercedes. At the end of the day, we have to have a Mercedes in the classroom, not only an educator, but also a mom of saying, I think I see this every day. And how we do this, Tammy, you bringing in first the outdoor experience to the indoor, and then seeing the range of how we define it, and even coming up with your, was it GIT, Genius in Training?
Geniuses in disguise.
GID. Yeah. Yeah, Geniuses in Disguise. And Marianne, you coming in from a different profession, also coming in with a Spanish background, spend time overseas. When you bring all this together, and we've got a lot of teachers who listen to this, we also have policymakers, and we also have parents. And this in character is unique because you're talking about a population that very few of us know about, but we also have to admit that some parents whose children fall in your population for a host of reasons don't want to tell people, either because of something, Tammy, you had mentioned about the stigma, or they're going to be treated differently, Or if you're on the gifted side, some gifted parents won't say that children are gifted because there's all the assumptions that come along with that. You know, if for the policymakers, and I would even say those who are involved at the state level, state and federal, and Danielle, of course, you do a lot of this work. What are some things we, the regular people, can do to help you with your work? If we're in law, if we're in education, that's one thing. If we're not in education, that's another. If we're in philanthropy, that's another. What can we do? Because there's probably a lot more students who fall into this category than we know. And you see it every day. You know, what would you recommend that we do differently? Yeah, Marianne.
Yeah, I think that policymakers, folks in the community, in the field, need to recognize that teachers have expertise in diagnosing what's happening with each and every student. As you get good at it over time and with lots of learning, you have to have the freedom to be nimble enough to make modifications to what you're doing to suit the needs of every student in your classroom. So the biggest obstacle I've seen for teachers is a micromanagement of teachers from the policy level to improve education, as if teachers were, you know, sort of widgets in a machine that could be perfectly run from a higher place. In truth, teachers are diagnosticians. They are artfully able to pull from an ever-increasing toolkit to give each student what they need. And I think that freedom to plan for differentiated instruction, like whatever kid needs, give it to them. And also to provide them, like trust them as experts so that they can do their job.
Got it. Mercedes, saw your hand up as well.
One of the things that I've noticed even throughout this conversation this evening is how we talk about exceptionality and how we talk about these students, whether they're in a talented and gifted program or not, or receiving special education services. And I just think it's important to have this soundbite that special education services, it's a noun, it's not an adjective. And so many times we are sorting kids and placing them away from their peers where they're going to be parts of community forever, right? And we separate the community and put these kids over here and these kids over here, and then expect somehow, right, that when students graduate after having had an IEP for most of their educational experience, that they're going to be prepared to have jobs and go into transition and to build relationships with other people. And I just don't believe that should be. Like, kids should be able to be with one another, to develop relationships. Teachers, staff, families, parents, we have something to learn from the students that are in our community, and not the other way around. I feel most often like I have expanded, my heart has expanded, my teaching skills and abilities have expanded because of working with this population that's often overlooked. And so take that as you will, but I just think we need to do a better job of being more cohesive in our communities and not ostracizing our youth.
Great points.
If I can piggyback on what Mercedes said, you know, we need to focus on the child, the student, the young adult, not their disability, not what they can't do, that child. And, you know, it's very, I've heard it so many times, and my heart sinks when I hear someone say, what's his problem?
Yep. And a whispering. Yeah.
Absolutely nothing. You know, when you have a teenager that an adult approaches and says, hi, how are you? That's not the way you talk to a teenager. Embrace that child, that youth for who they are. They're children first. So, you know, I definitely agree with Mercedes and what she's saying. But in terms of at a policy level, at a legislative level, we are actually on a good path right now, because of course with all of our programs, what do we need? We need funding. And since the implementation of IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, it has never been fully funded. And just recently, the projections that are coming out at our federal budget, it's unprecedented with the money that's being projected for IDEA. So, we're definitely taking a step in the right direction because we need funding for our programs. We need to look at our teacher shortage. We need to look at our teachers in the field. We need to focus on our teachers, the diversity of our teachers as well, and get those teachers in education. So, and of course, all of that needs to be supported at a federal level.
Thank you.
I can jump in because I want to tag the funding. The funding is so important. I heard something that like if we got 50% of what we were supposed to get for our special education services, the difference would be night and day. And so that funding is so critical. Danielle, thank you for advocating for that. With that, I would say how important it is to have quality preschool programs available to all, because it sets a foundation for learning that is so important. With that, I would love to see early intervention programs developed in a way that looks at biases. So for example, I spent the majority of my time as a resource teacher teaching 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders. And the students that I would get that would be newly identified as having a special educational need were young girls who are quiet, compliant, polite, but we're reading at pre-primary levels in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And so I think it's so critical for us to look really importantly and carefully at how we do have identification processes. And if we were to have universal supports for students in those early primary grades, how important that would be for reducing the number of kids of color who are within the special education realm. And we have to be honest about our early and primary teachers' capabilities in terms of their training and the support that they've been given to truly teach kids how to read, write, and compute math on the foundational levels. I work with teachers and they are wonderful. Teachers are so hardworking, but we don't have the tools that we need right off the bat first year. I know that I struggled a lot my first couple of years figuring it all out. So when I got into the classroom, like, so how do you teach somebody to read? Where do you start? What do you do? Luckily, in my master's program, I got to work with Dr. Nancy Mathers, who's one of the people who revamped the Woodcock-Johnson. And she was the toughest college teacher I've ever had. But she taught me how to teach students with systematic, explicit instruction, particularly in reading. And so I'm happy to share that with a lot of teachers that I work with. But you'd be surprised how many teachers says, oh, I wish I would have known that a long time ago. These foundational concrete things that we need for children to be successful in their early primary years.
Thank you.
A couple of things I'd like to address here. One is the special needs funding. And one of the things that is not in place for gifted students is a guaranteed amount of money, funding, as it is for special needs students. Even though GT is part of special needs, the funding that is set aside for it is much, much less, because the thinking there is that policymakers think these kids are already gifted, they don't need much help. Okay. And then, of course, you have IDEA, which kind of protects the services of the special needs students at the other end of the spectrum. But what happens to the special needs students at this end of the spectrum? And also, when you look at state plans for gifted students, for example, these are suggestions. They are not mandates. So, if a district, how do you determine whether a district has a good GT program? You look at the state plan and they have given like minimum necessary, this is good, and this is extra super good. And you kind of see where your district falls in that, in that 3 levels. So for special needs or for like funding for special needs kiddos, you don't have those categories, because you must give this much, right? Now, it's a different thing that they're not giving you the money, but stated in the law that you should get the money, right? But what I'm saying is for gifted students, it's not even stated in the law that GT students should get so much money. So that is where I feel as a GT teacher, it's extra hard to advocate for these students, because the mentality at the state and the district level itself is that these kids don't need as much money as the dyslexic student or the student, the special needs student. So that's one thing that I think is the difference between funding. For GT students, it's whatever they can get. Whereas for the special needs student, at the other end of the spectrum, it is like they must get so much, right? So if you want to cut, if you want to shift the budget around, the GT budget is the first place where things come from, because it's always viewed as a nice to have program. The other thing that I did want to talk about was how policymakers can help us. I think I might have already talked to about it, but there is not much funding, and also the understanding that GT kids also need emotional support. Because from some reading that I saw, all of these school shooters were actually gifted students. Because they are learners, nobody understands them. So if you don't have a program in school that will create a space for them to be understood, they are going to act on their own, right? Because nobody's understanding them. I don't think their parents even understand how talented and gifted they are. If you take the Columbine shooting, I mean, imagine the intelligence needed or the giftedness needed to plan such an attack, right? I mean, that itself kind of tells you that those kids, I mean, had they been properly provided for in school and being accepted in school for who they were, would things have changed for them? We don't know now, but I mean, and I think that's where I think GT students need a strong advocate for them, because there are enough people to advocate for special needs kids, right? On one end of the spectrum. But, even when I say no, GT is also special needs. Mm-hmm. It's just that, they can do some things better than their peers in the special needs arena, but that doesn't mean that they don't. I mean, they can do it quicker than others in the special needs arena, but that doesn't mean that they don't need help.
Thank you. Let me get a couple of people in. Brett. Oh, Tammy, you had your hand up. Sorry, I just saw it. No, actually, Marianne, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that we have to move away from thinking programs for gifted and talented, programs for special ed, and we need to think about the students themselves, the people. So, for example, in a school day, we've seen how social and emotional learning is vital. We have to have time in the day when students can tell us who they are. So a student who has high abilities in a particular area needs to be matched to opportunities within the regular classroom, right? I have a granddaughter, she's 7 years old, and she reads really well, she does things really quickly, and she's forced to sit on Zoom and watch all day the same lesson over and over. And seriously, it would take 2 minutes to just pull her out and give her a project that's of her own making, and she could then be pulled back in. So teachers need the pedagogy to be able to adapt instruction for the students who need a little extra help and other students who need to soar because they've already checked the box and they've already gotten it. That combined with the social and emotional support for all students to say, hey, Brett, how you doing? Like, tell me about your day. Let's talk. There needs to be an advisory focus in all K-12 so that students can talk to somebody in the day about their learning, their interests, their joys, and their sorrows.
Thank you. Let's go to Tammy, and then we'll go with you, Brett.
Okay, I love what you were just saying. And when I got moved to the high school, like I said, I moved from elementary to high school. One thing I noticed, and again, that was just like Brett, you were saying how you sometimes get put into a situation and And then it's just, to me, it's been an amazing blessing. When I went from elementary, I was like, I don't know how to work with high school kids, but these were a lot of the students were ones I had worked with when they were little. So I had taught them how to read. I had taught them how to tie their shoe. I remember all their temper tantrums. And then here I am working with them at the high school level. And, oh gosh, I feel like I'm going on so many, there's so many things because all of you said things I wanted to touch base on. But Marianne, what you were just saying about the communication and the social emotional piece and listening to students and who they are, what I ended up doing at the high school, it was sort of accidental because I came in and I didn't quite know how the high school would do with inclusion and pullouts and all these things. And again, look at the folders, but these are students. And I started just trying things, and it was, I ended up having a system where I had a classroom, we called it the Learning Center, and kids would come in as they needed because they didn't want the help in their general classrooms. But, they, I just thought we need to take the cane out in a second. And so I'll try to wrap this up, but ultimately I created a situation where I became the counselor almost more so than the teacher. I mean, because it was like, I'd be sitting side by side with students doing algebra. And as we're looking at the book and as we're looking at this, they'd say, hey, Miss Tammy, can I ask you something? And then they would open up, and this is just how it happened for 7 years at the high school. And so Gerard, back to your question about policy and what can people do, I don't know all the answers, of course, of how to solve the issue, but of proving competency, alternative methods toward demonstration of competency. And we all will acknowledge that kids learn at different paces and that kids learn in different ways, but then there's still this disconnect between what we believe and what we actually do, and then the standards of measurement, the standardized tests. And so we need to somehow, if we're thinking big and dreaming big, create systems that do honor and support what we know is true and what we believe and value, as opposed to say all these things, do all these things, but it's still the same measurements that tell them they're failures because they didn't have competency. Okay.
Thank you. Brett, I'm going to end up with you.
Well, I'll jump in quick. And I think the one thing the community could learn about my students is, stop judging them by what you see, because, well, I'm going to show you guys a picture here. So I don't know, but if you see this here, I had the absolute honor to go to Bangladesh a few years and mentor the first special education teachers in Bangladesh. And I met this student there who was autistic. He didn't speak. They didn't think he understood any language. They kind of thought he had no abilities, but he could draw like this. Mm-hmm. And I was looking at his drawings and I started to see English in them. He had labeled parts. And I asked them if he spoke English, and they said, no, he doesn't speak anything. And after looking at his pictures, I wrote on a piece of paper, draw a fish. And I pushed it in front of him. And everybody was saying, oh, no, don't do this. It's going to upset him. And it took him a couple minutes of staring at this piece of paper, and he drew me a fish. This is a young man in Bangladesh who everybody thought could do nothing. And yet he taught himself English. He had probably taught himself Bangla. And he is the most amazing young person who was able to create this incredible art. But everybody judged him because he didn't talk. He didn't speak the way we expected him to communicate. And yet it's a person who spoke himself a different language in a different country. So, people just have to withhold your judgment, just like you do with everyone else you meet. Everyone is a package with layers that unwrap, and you have to give my students the chance to be unwrapped in that same way, to show what's special inside of them, because every person I have ever worked with had special things inside of them. They just needed a different method to find them and another way for them to get them out. And if we give my students that, they can succeed and they can have a beautiful life. And that's what they want. That's what I want for them.
Thank you. And let me thank everyone for participating in this conversation. We began to unwrap and unpack certain parts. Some parts we did not touch at this point. Other parts were ones that we hadn't thought of. really big point about having conversations on in character is to get the ideas out there. I know someone's going to go, I got a couple of ideas that I'm thinking of as well. So again, let me thank all of you for taking time out of your schedule to share your thoughts, who you are, what you do. For those of you who shared your personal family stories, again, thank you for opening that up to us. And the fact that you are teaching people in Bangladesh, the first set of educators, interesting, that's another story, because we often forget about the international dynamics of working with this population. And when we make international comparisons, it's often not with the population that we're talking about, possibly gifted, but possibly not others. And Mercedes, the point that you mentioned about the adjective and the noun, there's an op-ed that you should definitely think about giving some thought to, because it's something that we often overlook and something that I'm sure I'm guilty of as well. So thanks for bringing that to our attention. With that, everyone have a great time, and look forward to seeing you and doing another conversation of In Character. Thank you.
Thank you.